For the longest time, Proton makes affordable cars. Cars that are designed to move people first and foremost, with luxuriousness being mostly a second thought. But when Geely entered the picture, they've decided that they're done fighting against Perodua and would rather like to go head-to-head against the likes of Toyota and Honda. And now they've brought out their latest and greatest flagship to showcase its premium aspirations, the same goal that they've set all these years ago. This is the Proton X90, a 6 or 7-seater D-segment SUV that will lead the national car makers' charge towards premiumness and also in terms of technology. But the question is this the Proton flagship that we've all been waiting for?
Petronas Premix 95 with Pro Drive. Malaysians' favorite fuel for smoother journeys.
This video review is brought to you by Petronas Premix 95 with Pro Drive. The Proton X90 is really a huge car and is perhaps most apparent when you look at it from the side. In fact, it's actually one of the largest in its segment, only losing in terms of overall length to the Mazda CX-8. But with so much body real estate, the rather simplistic design of the X90 just makes it look a little too bland, like there's not really that much going on at all. Now obviously, it's not a brand new design given that the X90 is based on the existing Geely Haoyue in China. But since Proton has their own design department, you'd think that they would have done a little bit more to make the X90 stand out a little. It is their flagship model after all. The best angle for the X90 is definitely from the front, especially thanks to this unique grille that combines elements of Proton's infinite width with what I can only explain as the chrome pins on a Mercedes-Benz. It's not a straight copy though, because this here has more of a satin silver finish rather than chrome, and according to Proton's chief designer, it's actually inspired by the patterns on a Songket. The LED reflector headlights look pretty nice too, especially with this slim L-shaped daytime running light signature that also doubles as the sequential turn indicators. But even with all that, it's still rather unassuming. I don't think you'll attract too much attention driving this car, which may or may not be a good thing depending on what you're looking for. There's also not too much going on over at the sides, except for these character lines above the fenders that highlight the fairly basic looking 19-inch wheels on this flagship variant, as well as a little bit of chrome trims on the plastic fairings. The worst offender for me though is the rear, because it's just so empty, with the only thing that really stands out being the Proton script here in the center. The taillights are honestly a little too simplistic and maybe even a little too small, and the bumpers down here, well, it's basically just the taillights here, copied and moved downwards. Maybe a bigger spoiler might help the car look a little more aggressive. Some people might call this elegant, but for me, it's honestly just a little too monotonous. It'll probably work a little better on the flashier and brighter colours, but with the cinnamon brown paint job of the car that we have here, well, it's perhaps just a little too forgettable. Looks aside though, the Proton X90 actually has a couple of creature comfort additions that does help elevate the ownership experience in both its sense of premiumness and also in terms of functionality. We've already seen things like the welcome light animation and the projector puddle lights before, but what I like the best here is the new proximity lock and unlock feature that will automatically unlock the doors as soon as you walk up to the car, even before you touch the door handle. The system has worked reliably for me over the entire weekend that I've had the car, and the best part is, it actually works for the boot as well. All you have to do is to stand near it with the keys in your pocket, and the boot hatch will automatically open up after a few seconds, which is good news because the button to open it is all the way down here and can be a bit hard to find, so much so that Proton actually includes a sticker to tell you where it is. The cabin of the X90 follows pretty much the same script as its exterior, which is to say it's fairly basic in its design even when compared to its younger siblings like the X50. I wouldn't call this satin aluminium trim here elegant, but rather more of a rugged or utilitarian look, which doesn't really gel well with what the rest of the car is trying to portray. But with that being said, it's still a highly functional cabin with a row of physical buttons for your dual zone climate control, as well as the biggest screens ever fitted onto a Proton, measuring 12.3 inches here for the central infotainment display, as well as what looks like 10.25 inches for the instrument cluster. Proton doesn't actually disclose the size for this, but it's now at least a full widescreen display, which is a first for the national car maker. But in terms of functionality though, there's still some work to be done, because even with such a wide screen, the X90 will only let you customize this tiny bit on the left side here, and only between a few not so different designs for the rev counter. As for the central infotainment display, it's all fairly snappy to use, and you now get some extra new functionalities built right into the Atlas OS system, including the Spotify app for your music, as well as soon even a payment app to pay for parking in certain places here in Malaysia. What I don't understand though is why on earth have they removed the hardware volume buttons over here? If I'm a passenger, the only way I can adjust the volume is by swiping down the screen and changing it here, which is just one step too many. And while we're complaining, you already know about this, but it's 2023, yet the Proton X90 still doesn't come with any Apple CarPlay or Android Auto connectivity. So for now, if I want to use Google Maps or Waze on my phone, I'll have to rely on a separate phone holder. Luckily, Trepo has this cool little magnetic phone holder that not only charges my phone wirelessly, but it's also modular, which means you can opt between a few different mounts, from the normal windscreen suction pad to an air vent mount, and even one for your rear passengers. Check them out now at trepo.asia and use the discount code AutoBuzz.my for 10% off your order. Moving below, you get two USB Type-A ports to charge your mobile phone, as well as a wireless charging pad. On the center console itself, you get a massive rotary dial for your driving mode switch, an electronic parking brake, as well as a fancy looking electronic gear lever that frees up some space down there for extra storage. While it may look cool, to use this thing though is actually kind of weird, because instead of pulling or pushing it further to activate drive or engage, you have to pull on it twice, which means it's more prone to error. There were a few times where I'm ready to leave my parking lot only to find myself revving on the engine and not moving because I wasn't in gear. Not a fan of this. As for materials and build quality, the Proton X90, at least for the two higher end variants, get nice Napa leather all around the interior and door cards to further amp up the premium atmosphere inside the cabin. As you'd expect, the plastic gets progressively harder the further down you look, but for some weird reason, this piece of dashboard up here is made out of hard, scratchy plastic, which really detracts from the otherwise very pleasant place to sit in. Speaking of sitting, both the front seats here get 4-way power adjustability with an extra 2-way lumbar support for the driver. There's also a pretty cool headrest extension that can give you a bit more support on longer journeys, but I did find that the thigh support here to be a little bit lacking, especially with the way that the height adjustments of this seat work, which only lifts up the rear portion. But at least you do get seat ventilation to keep your bum nice and cool. The two captain seats in the second row is actually the best seats to be in on the X90, because compared to the seats in front, this here actually has a longer seat base, giving you more support for your thigh, and it even comes with seat ventilation as well, which is something you usually only find on cars like the Toyota Alphard. It also comes with manual recline and sliding adjustments, and even if you slide in front, there's still a ton of knee room and leg room for you. And the best part is, because the floor is basically completely flat, you can pretty much sit in any position you like and still be comfortable on long journeys. The armrests on the doors are also wrapped in soft leather upholstery to further amp up the premium feeling of the rear passenger quarters. But the best feature here might just be the individual aircon vents on the roof for each passenger, complete with blower controls on the center console, making it perfect for our Malaysian climate. As for the third row seats, you can either try to squeeze your way through the center aisle over here, or what you can do is fold down the seats and slide it in front and enter through the doors. Once you're back here, the space here is actually pretty decent, even with these seats here adjusted to their most backward position. If you have nicer friends though, I think the space here really isn't too much of a problem for two adults to be sitting in. Although, as usual with all 3-row SUVs, the floor here is quite raised, so your legs are pretty much hanging in mid-air, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for longer journeys. But for kids though, you have two USB ports to juice up their tablets, and the aircon vents up here will hopefully keep them quiet and cool throughout the entire road trip. If you have kids, you may also want to check out the Trepo car mats. Not only are they custom cut for your specific car model, they are also antibacterial and easy to clean, so you won't have to worry about your kids spilling their drinks in the back seat. use the same AutoBuzz.my promo code for a 10% discount on checkout. As for the boot, the powered hatch here opens up to 237 litres, which is just about enough for 2 cabin-sized luggages plus a couple of backpacks. But if you fold down these rear seats, the cargo area opens up to a massive space that is pretty much enough to fit my entire wardrobe in here. This here is honestly my preferred setting, and it was what I did for my road trip to Penang over the weekend. But if, unlike me, you have more than 3 friends, then make sure to tell everyone to pack light. There are a couple of things to note here. Firstly, the load floor here is actually pretty high, so you have to lift your luggages quite high up in order to fit it into the boot. But more importantly, there's also no tonneau covers of any sort back here, so anyone can just look in and see what you have. So make sure to keep your valuable items underneath the load floor in this hidden compartment. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's go and find out how this thing drives, but first, a message from our sponsor. This video review is brought to you by Petronas Premax 95 with Pro Drive. Experience smoother journeys with Malaysia's favourite fuel, now with the world's first dual friction modifier and a customised detergent that cleans up to 99% of carbon deposits within your engine, giving you greater smoothness, increased responsiveness and improved fuel efficiency. Feel the difference today at a Petronas station near you. Remember when I said that the X90 will also help lead Proton's charge into their technology developments? Well, that's because this here is actually their first ever electrified production car. Their first step in a very long journey towards a homegrown EV. The Proton X90 is powered by the same 1.5-litre turbocharged 3-cylinder engine as in the X70 and X50. But on here, there's now an additional 48V mild hybrid system that gives the engine up to 13 horsepower and 45 Nm of extra power when needed, bringing the whole system's total max output up to 190 horsepower and 300 Nm of torque. But is that enough for such a big SUV? Well, the answer to that is yes, for most people. Even with a full load, the X90 still feels quite nimble in your day-to-day start-stop traffic. Taking off from a standstill never once felt cumbersome, but perhaps more importantly, in a car like this, it'll also reach the national speed limit effortlessly, with the 7-speed DCT gearbox here mashing through the gears so smoothly, just like any other automatic gearbox. Punch the accelerator and the car will continue to pick up pace gently to help you overtake on the highways, and that I think is just about enough for most drivers out there. It's certainly not underpowered, but just don't expect it to push you to the back of your seats. On paper, Proton claims that the new 48V mild hybrid system can help improve fuel consumption by up to 13%. And on my weekend with it, driving over 1000 kilometers from highway cruises to the usual Penang traffic jams, I've managed to clock in an average fuel consumption figure of 9 litres per 100 km. Now that's a far cry away from Proton's official figures, but I think that is already pretty impressive for a car this big, and especially with 4 adults plus luggages on board. A large part of that fuel saving comes down to a new Smart Glide feature that will automatically turn the engine completely off when you're coasting with your foot off the accelerator. And with your engine completely off, that means zero consumption even when you're travelling at highway speeds. And as soon as you start accelerating again, the engine just immediately springs back into life smoothly, courtesy of the 48V mild hybrid system. In fact, the engine actually starts off very quietly in just about any situation, making the automatic start-stop feature a joy to use. I'm usually someone who will turn that off immediately in any car that I get into, but I've actually never felt the need to do so on the X90. That said, there are times where the car can get a bit jerky, especially when you're taking off on a slope. It somehow feels as if the engine and gearbox is just fighting against the automatic brake hold feature. The 48V system also allows for what Proton calls extended shutdown. Instead of only killing the engine when you reach a standstill, the X90 here will actually completely turn off its engine when you're just gliding towards the traffic stop at under 15 km per hour. Now, this is not a car that you usually want to take on your toge runs. I mean, it is a large SUV after all. But you'll be surprised at how agile it feels even on the tight twisty roads around Batu Feringhi. The steering feel on here is pretty decent, but it's actually the impressive body control that helps give you the confidence around corners. Now, with such a large car, it's inevitably gonna have some body roll, but it's the way that it moves. It's as if the car is squatting from side to side as you string your way through the corners, almost like a graceful giant that's doing ballet. A large part of its handling capabilities is down to the use of a unique multi-link suspension instead of the torsion beam system that's found on its donor car. It's co-developed locally here by Proton engineers, and while it's still not quite the Lotus ride and handling the company used to market its cars previously, it really is still quite impressive even for such a big hunk of metal. The suspension setup is expertly tuned for Malaysian roads, especially on the highways, where this thing will likely spend a big part of its time. Proton says that they've done over 1.2 million kilometers of testing on our local roads, and I think that the results just speak for itself. It rides incredibly comfortably, with the dampers here soaking up all of the various road undulations and even the yellow speed breakers. In that sense, I think the X90 really is the perfect road trip machine because it'll just let you glide along in absolute comfort, even on long journeys and even if you're seated in the third row seats. And when you're driving on the highways, you can also take advantage of some of the new advanced driver assistance features, such as the road sign recognition system that scans for signboards up to 700 meters ahead and will also sound an alarm if you're over the detected speed limit. One of the most unique features here is something called the rear collision warning. Now imagine you're driving on the right lane at the speed limit, casually overtaking cars, and out of nowhere there's a Myvi coming from behind at crazy fast speeds. Everyone has experienced that before, right? Now on the X90, the car will actually detect the Myvi from behind and automatically put on the blinkers to warn both you and the crazy driver behind, so that they know the speed difference and you can move out of the way when possible. Another feature you'll likely use a lot on the highways is the intelligent cruise control system, and I have to say that it actually works really well on here, and in fact I'm actually using it right now. It hugs the center of the lane almost perfectly, but more impressively is the way that it moves the steering wheel. It's actually surprisingly natural. On the curvier turns, the car will actually hold a tighter line on the inside of the corner to give you a smoother experience, just like any other humans will do. And on braking, well, it can be a bit abrupt when another car jumps into your lane, but if you're just following behind another car, you won't have any problems at all. The only thing that I think needs some work here is its refinement levels, and more specifically in terms of noise. When you're driving on highway speeds, the tire roar does seem to eat into the cabin quite a bit, and that is with a pretty decent set of Continental Eco Contact tires from the factory. Wind noise also does start to seep in a little bit around this region when you're traveling say 100 km per hour, and that just unfortunately takes away a little bit in terms of the premiumness in the otherwise very pleasant place to be in. And given this is a flagship model, I don't think that's too much to ask. At 153,000 ringgit for this range-topping variant, the Proton X90 is honestly almost a bargain considering its premium-grade interior and its impressive road-holding capabilities. But if you're someone who's looking for a bit more style in your car, or if you need that extra power, then maybe look somewhere else. But car aside, I think it's really nice to see Proton moving towards a more premium direction. And personally, I can't wait to see what's next in store for us. For more information on the all-new Proton X90, do log on to AutoBuzz.my. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. And of course, that little bell icon will give you the notifications to our latest videos.
Petronas Premix 95 with Pro Drive. Malaysians' favorite fuel for smoother journeys.